Titanic was over 800 feet long, 92 feet wide, and weighed over 52,000 tons when completely loaded. There was more than enough room for luxuries. Terrace cafes, a fitness facility, a pool, and luxury Turkish baths were available in the Titanic's luxurious first-class section. The Titanic appeared to be a fantasy fulfilled. However, this fantasy swiftly turned into a nightmare when the ship allegedly collided with an iceberg and sank merely 4 days after setting sail. But the once largest ship, now submerged more than 11,000 feet below the ocean's surface after sinking on April 15, 1912, is more than that. But since the wrecked ship was discovered in 1985 by an expedition led by Jean-Louis Michel and Robert Ballard, it has become a sort of pilgrimage for explorers hunting for lost artifacts. Even though many things have been discovered and recovered, some shocking discoveries have also been made. In this video, we will look at 13 surprising discoveries from the long-sunk Titanic. Even before the Titanic sank, cruise liners in the North Atlantic encountered more icebergs than usual. Between Ireland and Newfoundland, icebergs were encountered very frequently, but a Royal Climatic Society study from 2014 suggested that meteorological conditions in April 1912 caused them to be unusually more frequent. Off the coast of Newfoundland, frigid air from northeastern Canada collided with the Labrador Current's southerly drift, causing a torrent of icebergs to be driven farther southward than usual compared to that of the 20th century. According to the authors, the maximum number of icebergs recorded in 1912 occurred in April rather than May, and there were about twice as many icebergs as in a regular year. On April 14, 1912, different ships sent the Titanic ship several radio warnings about the existence of ice on numerous routes, but the ship's captain never received any of these radio communications. The Titanic included first-class luxuries such as a swimming pool, Turkish bath, squash court, and a dog kennel. The renowned Ritz in Piccadilly Circus, London, served as the model for the Ritz restaurant on board. The magnificent staircase, which had oak paneling and bronze cherubs, dropped from 7 of the ship's 10 decks. A duplicate of the staircase is on display at the Titanic Museum in Missouri. The Titanic recorded deaths even before it set sail. Over 200 minor accidents and 28 significant disasters occurred in Belfast's Harland and Wolff shipyard, where the Titanic underwent construction for 2 years and 2 months, and 8 people died. The benchmark at the time was 1 death for every £100,000 invested. Therefore, the 8 deaths were a lower rate. Given that the Titanic cost £1.5 million to design, 15 deaths were probably unavoidable. Few workers died from damage caused by falling from the ship or the staging surrounding it. On the day the Titanic sailed, James Dobbin, a 43-year-old shipwright, died. At 12:10 p.m. on May 31, 1911, an estimated 10,000 onlookers watched the massive ship tumble from the yard onto the River Lagan. Dobbin got crushed when the timber stays that held the ship upright were removed. Even though hundreds of Titanic passengers survived, over 1,000 people perished. The Californian, the closest ship at less than 10 miles when the Titanic started to sink, ignored the Titanic's distress calls because its Marconi radio operator had retired to bed just before the Titanic's collision. The Titanic was then rescued by the 58-mile-away Cunard passenger liner Carpathia. After almost 2 hours after the collision, the Carpathia arrived to rescue the survivors. According to British government records, just 711 of the 2,201 people that boarded the Titanic survived the Titanic sinking, bringing the death total to 1,490. There were 206 survivors out of the 325 first-class passengers, making them the group with the lowest casualties. Only 118 of the 285 passengers survived in the second class. Only 178 of the 706 people in the third class survived. The Titanic's captain, the first mate, Marconi radio operator, and all the musicians of the Titanic band perished along with the ship. The Titanic disaster was announced by a telegraph manager. Following the Titanic's final radio transmission, listeners clamored for information from ships deployed to its rescue. Only a few bits of communication made it to New York on the Titanic. At a few minutes to 5 p.m. on April 15, a Marconi manager at New York's Wanamaker's department store got a signal confirming the Titanic sinking. David Sarnoff and the other radio operators informed the press that they were monitoring the signals received from the Cape Race station in Newfoundland. Although David Sarnoff stretched the details of the incident and the part he took in the Titanic sinking, claiming that he was the only person who got the distress call from the Titanic and that he waited in the Wanamaker's wireless station for 3 days straight to collect the list of survivors. Food that remains in the ruins. By the time the Titanic debris was discovered, almost all the food that sunk with the Titanic had vanished. According to Holger W. Janasch, a senior scientist in the biology department at Woods Hole in 1985, there may have been some cheese left in the cabinet. Some foodstuffs, like cheese, are protected from degradation by the same microbial activity that initiates the breakdown process. If the cheese was stored in boxes, it might not have changed much over time. The highly acidic or alkaline environments formed by the microorganisms that change milk or whey into cheese both prevent further deterioration of these highly proteinaceous meals. Because the natural aging process slowed down significantly during the years of deep-sea storage at 36 Fahrenheit, wines discovered on the seafloor may still be drinkable and presumably of good quality. The Carpathia was not the closest boat to the Titanic. The Californian was the liner nearest to the Titanic when it began sending distress signals. The Carpathia was a long distance away from the Titanic. However, the Californian liner did not act until it was way too late to come to their rescue. Crewmen on the Californian liner observed several strange lights in the sky about some minutes to 1 a.m. on April 15, 1912. They immediately informed their captain that these lights were distress flares coming from the Titanic. Tragically, the captain did not issue any commands. Because the Titanic's wireless operator had already retired for the night, the Californian liner only became aware of the Titanic distress calls the next morning. The Carpathia had already boarded all of the survivors at that juncture. Many people believe that if the Californian liner had heeded the Titanic's call for help, many more lives would be spared. 2 dogs survived. The instruction was that women and children were to board the lifeboats first. Given that there weren't enough lifeboats for everyone on board the Titanic, it seems surprising that 2 dogs managed to get aboard them. 2 of the 9 dogs on the Titanic survived, a Pomeranian and a Pekingese. A lifeboat training schedule for April 14, 1912 got cancelled. Captain Edward Smith may have wished to do one final Sunday service before retiring, but the Titanic sank that night. The crew had only completed one lifeboat drill while the ship was anchored. Even if the crew had received additional training and each lifeboat fully loaded, there still was not enough room for more than a quarter of the ship's max capacity. The Titanic was not expected to capsize, and there would be adequate time to evacuate the people. Because the Merchant Shipping Act of 1894 was not modified to include ships with tonnages greater than 10,000, this error was feasible. Affluent and well-known. With a net worth of over $90 million US, or more than $2 billion in today's money, John Jacob Astor IV was by far the richest affluent person who perished on the Titanic. Among the others were mining heir Benjamin Guggenheim and Titanic construction engineer Thomas Andrews. Isidor Strauss, a co-owner of Macy's department store, and his wife Ida also died on the ship. First-class passengers were reportedly valued at $500 million. Of this $500 million total, John Jacob Astor IV was said to be worth $87 million. In January 1912, Astor and his wife Madeleine boarded the Olympic on their way from New York. On the Titanic's return voyage, Astor, one of the world's wealthiest people, was the ship's richest passenger. He died in the shipwreck because it was customary to prioritize women and children first. The Titanic was reported to have lost $6 million in properties. However, Alfred Nurney's alleged fortune was excluded. Nurney was able to upgrade to first class by pretending to be a member of the aristocracy by using the fictional title of Baron Alfred von Draxstedt. He quickly secured access to a lifeboat from the first-class cigar lounge. Unlike the 168 men in his initial second-class accommodations, only 14 of whom survived the tragedy. Recovered bodies. A few days after the collision, a cable repair shop, Mackay Bennett, was deployed from Halifax to locate and recover bodies. One day before the Titanic tragedy survivors docked in New York. On board, the Mackay Bennett were embalming chemicals, 40 morticians, barrels of ice, and about 100 coffins. About 306 bodies were discovered by the crew. About 116 of the bodies discovered by the Mackay Bennett were too badly damaged to be brought back for a proper burial. This crew tried to identify the bodies and dispatched more ships to look for bodies. There were 328 bodies discovered in total, but 119 of them were in such horrible form that they had to be resubmerged in water. Many unidentified Titanic passengers. Even though the Titanic's official death toll was 1,503 out of 2,208 passengers, there were 705 survivors, and more than 100 unidentified remains were interred in Halifax, Nova Scotia's Fairview Lawn Cemetery. Even the recovered bodies were difficult to identify because so many people travelled under fictitious names and came from all walks of life. After 73 years, the shipwreck was discovered. The whole world knew the Titanic collided with an iceberg and where it took place. It took 73 years to find the ruins. On the 1st of September 1985, Dr. Robert Ballard, an American oceanographer, located the Titanic liner. The wreckage is now a UNESCO-designated World Heritage Site and is located 2,000 feet from the rear of the ship and 2 miles below the surface of the water. Thousands of artifacts, many of which were valuable pieces of jewelry, were recovered from the ruins. Most of them were auctioned at exorbitant prices. And that brings us to the end of this video. Let us know what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the notification bell to get notified when we post a new video.